I'm KG MATHAIKUTTY, a professional volunteer in disaster management and Executive Secretary, United Religions Initiative, South India, Sri Lanka region. Welcome to Disaster Management Session 3. Greetings from U.R.I. United Religions Initiative is an interfaith peace-building organization headquartered in San Francisco. It has 1,054 cooperation circle units as on date in 108 countries. So, through this office, we are trying to promote disaster management system in communities and trying to establish linkage between the government and the local people who are the first respondent. In this session, I shall try to explain certain basics of the disaster management cycle and activities that could be considered in each phases. Broadly, the disaster management cycle can be divided into two parts, post-disaster and pre-disaster phases. In the disaster management cycle, let us start with preparedness phase. What is preparedness? It is a series of action to reduce the risk, minimize the effect of disaster, and facilitate a rapid and early recovery at different levels of governance. This includes taking action to reduce damages to a community before a disaster happens. Activities like educating the public on the risk of potential disasters and their effects, emphasizing building codes, public safety regulations, etc. It includes a set of action that enhance the ability of communities and governments to respond to a disaster. Preparedness steps may include developing plans of action in response to disasters, practice drills and exercise for emergency personnel, activation of early warning systems, developing evacuation plans, and installing emergency communications system. Quick actions are taken during and after the disaster in order to provide emergency, first aid, medical care, food, water and sanitation support, shelter, transportation of disaster victims, safety and security, actions taken to restore the community to a normal state through reconstruction of houses, damaged roads, and basic infrastructure, restore livelihood, etc. Community-based disaster management of the community preparedness. In case of disasters, people at the community level have more to lose because they are the ones who directly hit by disasters, whether major or minor. On the other hand, community has the most to gain if they can reduce the impact of disasters by effectively using their capacities. This concept gave rise to the idea of community-based disaster management, where communities are put at the forefront, ultimate sufferer, first responder with in-depth knowledge about the area. External or professional help takes time to reach after a disaster. Evidence shows that top-down disaster risk management and response program fail to address specific local needs of vulnerable communities, ignore the potential of local resources and capacities, and may, in case, even increase people's vulnerability. Community-based disaster management, CBDM, takes a bottom-up approach, recognizing that affected populations are best placed to identify their vulnerabilities and needs, while also acknowledging their agency to respond. Through community-based disaster management system, vulnerable groups and communities can be transformed to disaster resilient communities, which can withstand and recover from stresses and shocks from the natural or physical and socio-economic, political and environmental. Aim of disaster management is to reduce vulnerabilities and increase capacities of vulnerable groups and communities to cope with, prevent or minimize loss and damage to life, property and the environment, minimize human suffering and hasten recovery. A process of disaster risk management in which at-risk communities are actively engaged to reduce their vulnerabilities and enhance their capacities through identification, analysis, treatment, monitoring and evaluation of the disaster risk. Community-based disaster management (CBDM) is an approach to building the capacity of communities to assess their vulnerability to both human-induced and natural hazards and develop strategies and resources necessary to prevent and mitigate the impact of identified hazard as well as respond, rehabilitate and recover from the hazard. The approach promoted is to build people's capacity of coping with the disaster risk and reducing their vulnerability, thereby developing safer and more resilient communities. This involves a change in focus from emergency response to planned activities that would mitigate or prevent disasters. It is to be noted that if readiness and capacity is insufficient, and if vulnerabilities are too great, if the scale of hazard is too big, and then the risk is too high, if emergencies cannot be managed locally, the communities may not be able to cope. In that case, the disaster is bound to occur. Who constitute community? The prospective stakeholders are general public, elected members, NGOs, CBOs, civil society organizations, donors, academician, corporate sector, etc. So it can go according to the areas resources. A community is a group that is organized around common values and is bound by attributed with social cohesion within a shared geographical location. Generally, in social units larger than a household, the community can be homogeneous or heterogeneous in nature. Let us understand community resilience with the help of an analogy. A resilient community has the characteristic of a bamboo plant. It is able to recover fast, resume its original form, adapt easily to change situation, cope with the situation without external support. A community-based disaster risk reduction plan would support the community in planning for being resilient. Disaster risk or vulnerability reduction is the foundation of CBDM. Community is a key resource in disaster risk reduction. Contribute to people's empowerment by way of physical safety, guaranteed access and more on resources. Promotes communities' participation in decision making related to risk reduction. CBDM therefore brings together the multitude of community stakeholders for disaster risk reduction, enables expansion of resource base. A critical element of sustainable disaster management is communities' participation in these activities. The most common elements of community involvement are partnership, participation, empowerment, ownership by the local people. The emphasis of disaster management efforts should focus on communities and the people who live in there. Unless the disaster management efforts are sustainable at individual and community level, it is difficult to reduce the losses and scale of tragedy. stages of establishing a community-based disaster management system, I shall try to list out. Selection of the community, that is foremost important. Community is at risk, especially on priority. Rapport building and understanding the identified community. Participatory community risk assessment. Participatory action planning. Requisite skill training. Mock drill. Participatory monitoring and evaluation of the project. These are all important for the effective community system. Through these community-based activities, people should be able to participate alongside government officials and expert group as the direct stakeholders in these activities. People should own problem, consequences and challenges of any mitigation and preparedness initiatives. It is necessary to take people's involvement further into policy and strategy. This process includes sense of ownership to the people, which results in their continuous engagement and long-term commitment to these activities. Thus, involvement of communities is important in both pre-disaster mitigation and post-disaster response and recovery process. Community-led implementation of the project. While the immediate priority at this time is to protect people by limiting I'm talking about the current situation, the spread of COVID-19. We are still uncertain up to what level it will go. Today, the death toll have crossed 300,000 people in all over the world. We need to remain deeply committed to our humble wish and mandate of facilitating global environmental government. This is because at the end of the day, the health of people and the health of our planet are intimately connected. Community has to play a major role in it. Human activity has altered virtually every corner of our planet, from land to ocean. And as the human continue to relentlessly encroach on nature and degrades ecosystems, we endanger human health. In fact, 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, that is, virus or originating from the transfer from animals and other insects, whether domesticated or wild, to humans. It is precisely because of the interconnected nature of all life on this planet and in the post-crisis settings, as governments approve stimulus packages to support job creation, poverty reduction, development and economic growth, we will continue to extend our support and to cooperate to build back better, guided by principles and standards of sustainable production and consumption. This is in a way an opportunity as well to restructure our thinking, our holistic approach towards the health of the Mother Earth. These actions should manage of hazardous medical and chemical waste, strong and global stewardship of nature and biodiversity, and a clear commitment to building back better, creating green jobs and facilitating the transition to a carbon neutral future will be key to a resilient and sustainable future and to our reaching the sustainable development goals of the UN. And that, of course, remain the future we all want. Every disaster brings certain good lessons, and that helps rebuilding better, building back better. So let us be united in making our Mother Earth a safe place to live. For this, we need the Creator's support and it always there if we are willing to abide by the guidance set by the Almighty God. Thank you. May God bless.